As Botswana heads to the 2019 general elections, there's interest in how exactly things are going to turn out. This is The Voice on Politics. I'm Kealeboga Dihutso. The Voice newspaper has every intention of actually presenting the rundown to the elections with the intention of ensuring that people are as informed as possible about the general elections. This is a first. It's always as such, it's so important that we should get it from the horse's mouth. The people who actually came up with this initiative as to why exactly they want to go about this route. We know the Voice newspaper is, well, a newspaper. We're used to the print version of it. We also know that the biggest online presence in Botswana. But the point really is, what exactly is it that they're offering us this time around? Before we get on to discussing what we have to discuss today, I'd love to bring in the editor-in chief of the Voice newspaper, Ep01, to tell us what exactly inspired this particular initiative. Good afternoon, Mabukutlo.
Hello, Kealeboga.
Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great initiative. This is going to be a first in Botswana, obviously.
Yes.
Why did you guys decide to go this route? Don't you think it's a bit risky?
Risky? No. You have to take risks. That's what business is all about, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So we decided to take advantage of our readers who have now migrated. As you know, there's been digital migration for so long. A lot of people are now living online.
Yes.
A lot of people have gone to digital platforms, and we've got about close to 700,000 viewers on Facebook. So we decided that we also inform those people. We have realized that even as newspaper sales decline, people are now going digital. So we should take content to where people are. That's why we have decided to come up with this initiative so that we can inform our viewers and our readers across the country.
So what exactly will you be offering?
We will be offering interviews with your experts. We'll be offering interviews with people on the ground. Our reporters will be on the field, and then we'll have hosts in the studio talking to them live on the day of elections and the day after the elections, the day of the counting.
Beautiful stuff. So that is exactly what the Voice Online, the Voice newspaper will be offering when we get to the elections.
Yes.
I'd love to have you here. And of course, when we come back, we're going to be discussing the one issue that everyone has been talking about. We've been talking for so long about the possibility of a hung parliament. But what is a hung parliament? When we come back, we're joined by a legal expert to actually break that down. Welcome back. As I was saying before we went for a break, we have people suspecting or speculation that we just might have a hung parliament in Botswana. But we've never really had someone explain to us exactly what a hung parliament is in the context of Botswana. A lot of people have always taken it for granted that a simple majority actually does pertain, and we automatically get the government and the government formed by one party. But this time around, the situation is so tense that there's an expectation of the suspicion that we just might end up with a hung parliament. But what exactly is a hung parliament? I'm joined in the studio by a legal expert, of Kgarabamono and Pillar Law Practice, to actually break this down for us. Good afternoon, Kgarabamono.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Yeah, in the context of Botswana, what is a hung parliament?
It's a very difficult thing to explain.
Yes.
Partly because there is no definition of what a hung parliament is.
Yes.
Particularly if you look at our constitution. So if you are looking for the phrase hung parliament, you're not going to find it in the constitution.
Yes.
But it basically describes a situation, particularly in those jurisdictions that follow the Westminster style of democracy or of parliament, where no one political party garners the majority of seats in parliament, in what we call our National Assembly. So that's really why it's called hung, because there is no definite winner or clear winner in the race to garner the majority of seats in parliament.
When we say majority, what are we referring to here?
Well, if you're talking about the Botswana context,
yes,
then the majority of seats would be whoever takes the majority of the 57 seats in Parliament. Remember, there are 57 constituencies altogether.
Yes.
You do not count specially elected seats,
Yes.
so we are left with those 57. Whoever takes the most seats, whoever takes the majority of those 57 is the one that whose presidential candidate becomes the president of Botswana. So in our context, it's 29.
It's 29. So we could have an instance where maybe no single party gets, say, 29 constituencies.
Right.
Which does that mean they will not be able to form government?
It means that they will not be able to form a government on their own. That's essentially what it means.
Yes.
Because the idea of seats, maybe if I can take it back to the Westminster style of doing things.
Yes.
The idea behind that way of doing things is that the party that has the majority is the party whose leader becomes prime minister. This is in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And what we have done is brought it to our situation where the party that garners the majority of seats in Parliament is the party, or in the National Assembly, is the party whose leader becomes the president of Botswana. And as you know, in the British system and in our system, we require those seats because it is that party that is called upon to govern the country. And when you govern the country, it means bringing your policies, your programs, legislation, all of that stuff. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you have the majority of seats. Because if you have a minority of seats, then the opposition, on the other hand, can always gang up and block you from passing legislation, right? Because they would have put together, they would have the majority.
Yes.
Right. So the idea behind our system is that the president, who is the leader of the executive, who is the person whose policies and programs should be passed through the National Assembly, should enjoy the confidence of the National Assembly. In other words, when they bring in legislation, there should be a modicum of confidence that he or she is going to get their program through.
Yes.
Right. Now, if you are in the minority, then we don't have that, because you could be shot down at any time by the opposition ganging up against you.
But then we always talk about Botswana being a first past the post sort of setup.
Yeah.
How then do you reconcile it with that? Because I think sometimes the confusion comes from, in most of our constituencies, a lot of members of parliament, actually more people vote against them than for them.
Yeah.
Then how do we reconcile those two? Because a lot of us have been thinking that the same can apply in parliament. Say, for example, one party gets 20 constituencies, and the rest of the 37 constituencies are distributed among the other parties.
Yeah.
So in that instance, can we have a government?
Yeah. In that instance, you can. So if we take your example,
Yes.
Party A gets 20 seats.
Yes.
Right. The other parties, the other three parties,
Yes.
get the balance of the 37. Essentially, that party A will never get its program through, because unless it combines with other parties who are in the official opposition,
Yes.
unless it combines with those other parties, they will never get their program through, because those 37 will shoot down any legislation, any policy, or anything that's brought to the floor of
Okay,
the National
just to
Assembly.
cut in principle, I get it.
Yeah.
I get what you mean from a political point of view.
Right.
But I'm far more interested in getting what the law says in an instance where
Yeah.
one party has been voted for more than any other party,
Right.
but cumulatively, the other three parties, the other four parties have got more numbers than that party. Because it applies at constituency level. Does it apply in the case of parliament, and what does the law say on that?
It does apply at constituency level. In other words, we have first past the post.
Yes.
But in the National Assembly, it does not apply.
Yes.
The Constitution specifically states that the person who shall be elected president is the person who enjoys the confidence of more than half of the seats in of the electors in parliament, which sometimes we call seats and all. But of course, seats are actual people, right?
Yes.
They're actual members of parliament.
Yes.
So this our constitution specifically requires that the president should come from the person who enjoys the support of over half, 29 and above of the seats in parliament.
But then, having said that, let me just bring this to a real life situation. We've got Botswana Patriotic Front with 16 or 18
where they're standing.
MP, MP candidates.
Yeah.
Clearly on their own, even if they were to win all the 16 or all the 18, they can't form a government on their own.
Right.
What is the reasoning then behind having VPF presidential candidates on the ballot as well?
Yeah, I mean, well, you see, the thing is, our constitution doesn't talk about parties.
Yes.
Yeah. You see, parties are a creation of us, Rona, as Botswana, and all of that stuff. But the constitution itself does not speak about parties.
Yes.
It speaks about seats. It speaks about members of parliament. It speaks about electors in the National Assembly. It does not say party X, party Y, etc., etc. So the closest thing that the constitution comes to when speaking about parties is where it says that when you come to the nomination of presidential candidates,
Yes.
you as a person who is nominating a presidential candidate as a parliamentary candidate,
Yes.
right? So you're a parliamentary candidate, you have to nominate somebody you say you want to become president,
Yes.
right? You have to follow the same color and symbol as the person who you are nominating as president. That's the closest indication or part where we get to anything like speaking about a party. But generally, the constitution doesn't speak about parties. So parties are a creation of our electoral system, right? Not a creation of the constitution.
Okay.
So when you go to parliament as a parliamentary candidate,
Yes.
you must state who you want to be your presidential candidate, right?
Yes.
And obviously that person must garner immediately after parliament. They do the calculations. How many people did this person garner? And then that person, if they reach the number 29 and above,
Yes.
they become president. Not on the basis of party.
Okay.
So in that vein, anybody can become a presidential candidate. Even somebody who is standing as a parliamentary candidate of one,
Yes.
they can stand as a presidential candidate,
Yes.
right? Now it is up to so that's the first stage, right? So we've always operated on the basis that I think we've had a very strong ruling party,
Yes.
right? And that being the case, we may not have thought about how these things are going to happen going forward. But when you look at the Constitution does take into consideration a situation where parties do not reach the number 29.
When we come back, I want him to break it down for us exactly what then needs to happen if no single party gets 29 constituencies. We'll be right back.
We know what you're looking for.
Your specially grilled newspaper, spiced with lifestyle, sport, entertainment, politics, business, and international news. The Voice is available every Friday. Subscribe now. The Voice.
Welcome back. Earlier on, we were discussing exactly what it means for what a hung parliament is really in the context of Botswana. We're still trying to really assess and maybe scrutinize this to try and really get to it. We don't know whether it's going to happen, but the fact that we're discussing it suggests that the elections are a little bit tighter than most people actually would have thought. So it's important that Botswana really do understand what it means to have a hung parliament. I'm with also Harabamono of Harabamono and Pillar Law Practice, and we continue our discussion. I still need you, Harabamono, to explain this to me, because you're still explaining the issue of why BPF with 16 MPs or MP candidates rather would have a presidential candidate. I think we could continue along that vein, but we could expound on it maybe by looking into what happens if no single party gets 29 seats. What is supposed to happen legally?
Okay, let me start with the presidential candidates.
Yes.
Presidential candidates are governed, or the nomination of presidential candidates is governed by a particular act, right, called the Presidential Elections Supplementary Provisions Act.
Yes.
In that act, it states that somebody can become a presidential candidate as long as they receive 1,000 nominations. I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yes.
That was what was happening at the High Court a few weeks ago, where parties were coming forward with the people that they wanted to be their presidential candidates. Right, all of those people who got 1,000 nominations or more, but really the standard is 1,000 nominations because that's what the Act says, they become a presidential candidate.
Yes.
Full stop, right?
Yes.
Then we come to the Constitution of Botswana, right? And the Constitution of Botswana states that you've now done the nominations in terms of that act.
Yes.
When it comes to the elections, right, the national elections, we will now know who has been elected in each one of those 57 constituencies,
Yes.
right? All of those people, all those people who have been elected, when they stood as parliamentary candidates or for the nomination as parliamentary candidate, they submitted the color and symbol that they are aligned to, and that must be aligned to a presidential candidate.
Yes.
So what happens automatically in terms of Section 32 of the Constitution is that it's a simple matter of calculation. There's no actual voting or anything. The returning officer sits there and says, those people of this color got this number of seats. Those people of this color got this number of seats. Therefore, the person elected as president of Botswana is this person because they got 29 or more of those.
So the
of
minute,
those-
the
of
minute a
those-
particular color reaches 29,
that
the
person
president-
automatically
the
becomes
president-elect,
president.
yes,
Right.
yes.
That's the first stage.
yes.
The second stage now comes where, in a scenario where none of those people get 29 or more, what then happens? And the Constitution then says that you then move to, that basically means that the returning officer has to declare that nobody has been elected president of Botswana.
Yes.
Right. That is now a scenario where you now talk of the hung parliament,
Yes.
because no one person, no one party got more than 29 seats. So
Yes.
you have a hung parliament.
Yes.
We then move into Section 35 of the Constitution, where it says, if that happens, and I'm just going to try to encapsulate it because it's a bit complicated, it uses a lot of languages and
Yes.
all of that stuff, but I'll get the kernel of what it says.
Yes.
It states that if that happens, in a situation where no presidential candidate gets more than 29 votes,
Yes.
the returning officer or the speaker then carries out another election.
Yeah.
And in this election, anybody can become a nominee for president.
So basically, like
Exactly.
Yes.
As long as
Everyone can-
as long as you get 10 nominations
Yes.
from your fellow parliamentarians, you can become a candidate. So person one comes and says to his fellow candidate, no, it's like you said, it's Kealeboga Dihutso.
Yeah.
I need 10 of you guys. These 10 say, okay, we support you. Another guy comes and he says 10. Another woman says 10. And all of those people stand as presidential candidates.
So-
and then a vote is held.
So let me get this straight. So our current 4 presidential candidates, that falls off immediately.
That falls away.
They are no longer in contention.
They can be in contention, of course, if they get the 10. And
Okay.
I presume if you can get 1,000 nominations, you can get most of them are going to get 10, depending on how the vote turns out, right? Because
Okay.
it depends on how many seats they want. So if a party wins 2 seats in parliament,
Yes.
it's very unlikely that their presidential candidate is going to get 10 unless they sit. And this is now where the coalition issues come in.
Yes.
Unless they sit with other parties and say, "Now I've only got 2. You guys have 4. The other guys have 4. Can you 4 and that 4 and our 2 create 10, and then we put forward a presidential candidate?"
So just to clarify, let's say one of the 4 presidential candidates loses elections, and we have a hung parliament.
In other words, they don't have any seats in parliament.
No, any of the presidential candidates.
Right.
If say one of them or all of them don't make it into
29,
parliament,
okay.
into parliament, what
Okay.
happens there?
Well-
that does not mean they can no longer come in because the presidential candidate is going into the elections.
The interesting part about that is that Section 35 says a person. So it doesn't qualify who that person is. It doesn't say a member of parliament. It doesn't say a member of the National Assembly. It says a person can qualify to be president if they are nominated by 10 members of the National Assembly. So that brings in a very interesting dynamic that hasn't been tested yet.
Yes.
For me, on a reading on the face of it, it means any person, even you, Kealeboga, you could stand up and say, "I want to be president of Botswana."
And then I get 10
And I get 10 members of the National Assembly to support me. And my name can be on the ballot. So the interesting thing about the way the Constitution is crafted is that when you speak of nominations with respect to the normal way of doing it,
Yes.
right? It talks about a presidential candidate who has been nominated in line with the Presidential
Supplementary.
Elections
Yeah.
Supplementary Provisions Act.
Yes.
But then when it comes to a hung parliament election, it simply says a person, which on a simple reading of it means anybody can stand to be.
You don't have to be in power.
You don't have to be in
So
power.
even if, because I think, no, actually, 3 of the presidential candidates actually do have constituencies. So
That
even,
they're standing for.
Yes,
Yeah.
even if they lost,
Yeah.
they can still be nominated by the parliament.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
That is-
that's how my reading of the provision is. It's as simple as that. And you have to ask yourself the question: why did the drafters of the Constitution change the language? That's one of the things that you'd have to ask if you're trying to interpret this. Why, in the first instance, did they talk specifically of the presidential nominees
Yes.
in terms of that act? But then when it comes to an election with under a hung parliament situation, they talk about a person.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because I think the only logical explanation to me is that they believe that anybody could stand to become president. Remember, the president of the country is not a member of parliament by virtue of them having won a seat.
Yes.
So right now we see that our current president is not running for a parliamentary seat.
Yes.
He is a member of parliament ex officio. So simply because he's the president of the country, he becomes a member of parliament.
Yes.
Right. So it makes sense. If anybody can become president, then they will become president. You, Dihutso becomes president, and then ex officio, you become a member of parliament. You don't have to run for a particular seat.
Okay, then take us through the process in the event that we do have a nomination. What then goes on? Because there's something that confuses me when I'm reading the Constitution. It talks of the Speaker of the National Assembly.
Yeah.
So the Speaker of the National Assembly maintains that position
Yeah,
even
until
when
until a new speaker is. So for continuity,
Yes.
the speaker of the speaker holds that position until a new speaker is elected. But the first election that takes place
Yes.
is the election of the president.
Yes.
Right, and then the speaker of the National Assembly is elected.
Then what happens when we have a hung parliament and we have those nominations? What's supposed to take place in parliament now?
In which for the presidential.
If it's hung, if it's a hung
Yeah.
parliament.
Okay. So what happens then is that obviously there will be all sorts of horse trading,
Yes.
which is what you would expect. So maybe guys forming coalitions and saying, okay, we need to get together so that we get 29 seats, etc. You have another vote,
Yes.
and if I'm not mistaken, you have 3 votes until it's clear who the winner is. So if in the first instance there's still no one who reaches 29, the speaker conducts another vote, and what they call another ballot, and then you have another ballot, and if it's still not clear who gets to 29, you have another ballot. If it's still not clear who gets to 29, then the National Assembly is dissolved. And there are 2 devices that they use. They say that the election, that the previous election that voted these people in is nullified, and I suppose the only way that you can now go back is to go back to the people, have another vote, and we come and see whether our National Assembly will be sorted out in a second general election.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I still want you to unpack that. I'm more confused now than I was before, so by the time you're done, you should really have broken that down to me. So when we come back, we're actually going to be looking into that. How long should this process take place, and who exactly makes these decisions as to what needs to happen or not? Because I do believe there's a section where it's suggested that is at the discretion or the opinion of the Speaker of the National Assembly. I don't exactly get the exact section of that, but I think it's something we need to break down properly so we all understand.
All right.
We'll be right back.
We know what you're looking for.
Your specially grilled newspaper, spiced with lifestyle, sport, entertainment, politics, business, and international news. The Voice is available every Friday. Subscribe now. The Voice.
Okay, welcome back, and we're still discussing the idea of hung parliament. Look, it may not happen. But it's a good thing that we're beginning to learn just one of the many scenarios that could actually transpire with these elections. And still a bit confused. I hope you are getting what Ozo of Garabamon and Pillar Law Practice has been doing, breaking down the possibility of, what needs to happen in the event of a hung parliament. And as we continue with this particular discussion, when you talk about 3 ballots taking place in parliament, how long are we talking about? Are we saying this should be happening the same day, or it happens over a period of a few days, or the law doesn't say anything about that?
Yes, I mean, so in the first instance, as we discussed earlier on, we are talking about president being elected in the normal course, right?
Yes.
So the Constitution talks about the new National Assembly meeting on such day not being more than 14 days after the result of the election is ascertained.
Yes.
Right. So the new National Assembly must meet not more than 14 days, within a 14-day period,
Yes.
after the IEC or the returning officer has declared that these are the results of the 2019 elections.
Yes.
Right. It is at that point that, remember I said it happens automatically.
Yes.
It's just a matter of looking at the numbers.
Yes.
Now, if no one has been elected as president,
Yes.
looking at those numbers, we then move on to section 35(5), right? And it's a rather long section and speaks to all of those things. But basically, it states that if there is no candidate duly nominated for the first ballot, right? So we take the first ballot within with paragraph B, or if after the number of ballots permitted under paragraph F, which is not more than 3 ballots, have been taken, and no candidate has been declared elected, Parliament shall stand dissolved, or in the case of a presidential election held in accordance with section 32(6) of this Constitution, the foregoing general election shall be void.
Yes.
So that's what happens. So the 3 ballots come from, not more than 3 ballots shall be taken unless, in the opinion of the Speaker, the holding of further ballots is likely to result in the election of a president, in which case not more than 2 further ballots may be taken. So the first case is 3 ballots.
Yes.
The Speaker, as the returning officer, or the person who is conducting the elections, can give 3 ballots to be taken.
Yes.
If the Speaker is of the view that no, we might be getting somewhere here, we're hovering, somebody here is hovering around 28, 27, and it may look like if there are further negotiations around these parties, they may push it to 29. The Speaker can offer 2 more, to hold more ballots, but cannot offer more than 2.
Yes.
If after those 3 or the maximum of 5 ballots are exhausted, then the Speaker can declare that no candidate has been declared elected, and Parliament shall stand dissolved.
Okay, that I get. I get a bit concerned when we say the opinion of the Speaker. Are there any guidelines as to what exactly would inform this opinion, or is just a sentiment or thumbsuck?
I think the way that the Constitution is designed is such that you remember, this is taking place in Parliament,
yes.
and therefore that's the Speaker's domain.
Okay.
Right? They are the head of that branch of the state.
Yes.
So they do give the Constitution does give the Speaker some discretion, but remember it qualifies that discretion and says the Speaker cannot hold more than 2 more
Yes.
ballots. So that's it. So in other words, you can have 3 ballots.
Yes.
If after the end of 3 ballots, the Speaker feels that no, we may need some more ballots, then the Constitution gives the Speaker that discretion to hold more ballots, but no more than 2. So it already cuts off the Speaker and says, the Speaker, I'm giving you this discretion,
Yes.
but you cannot have more than 2.
I don't know whether you got my question. When we talk about opinion, the opinion,
Yeah.
that's what I said, is it an issue of sentiment, or are there any guidelines put out to say this is what informs the Speaker's opinion?
No, I mean the Constitution doesn't give any guidelines, and simply says unless in the opinion of the Speaker, the holding of further ballots is likely to result in the election of a president. So if there's a guideline, there's the guideline. In other words, the Speaker can exercise that discretion if, in their opinion, the holding of further ballots is likely to result in the election of a president.
Okay, Mr. Garabamon, let's just put it down as frankly as possible. We do know where the Speaker, which party the Speaker comes from. is it not possible that, given how vague that particular clause is, that the Speaker could just decide that the party she comes from is at a disadvantage and say, in her opinion, we should just go for fresh elections? That's what that's really the gist of my question.
Well, I mean, let's take it step by step.
Yes.
Firstly, the cutoff point is 3 ballots, right? So 3 ballots must be held. In other words, those people on the floor of the National Assembly have 3 chances to get to 29, right? At the end of 3 ballots, we see there's no answer to the question that we're asking ourselves: who is going to be president of Botswana? Then we must go to elections, unless the Speaker feels that the holding of more ballots. You see what I'm saying now? So if at the end of 3 ballots, that is it, the assembly is dissolved, then that is the end of the question. It is up to the Speaker if they feel that the holding of more ballots will result in the election of the president to exercise their discretion in that way. And I think the reason why they're using this mechanism is so that we don't rush to another general election. I think the framers were thinking, give these people as much a chance as possible to try and get to 29 before us rushing to another general election, because of course that comes with costs, it comes with all sorts of it's a whole process on its own.
But we agree that it can be abused. That particular clause can be
whenever
abused.
you give somebody a discretion, that discretion can be abused. But at the end of the day, I think it does. I think the Speaker should be allowed that discretion, because it is, like I'm saying, their house. They're the head of that house, and as the head of that arm of the state, they should be allowed some modicum of discretion on how things take place.
We just have to assume that they will be benevolent in the excess of such
just
powers.
like we do right now whenever they are running parliament, right?
Yes.
I mean, when the Speaker runs parliamentary business, we take it at face value that the Speaker will be fair and balanced. Sometimes they're not, but we don't then remove their whole discretion. We put it on faith that this person will act in a balanced manner.
So we move to coalitions now. At what point do you think this should be taking place? I'm asking this as an observer, not so much as a legal expert.
Yeah.
At what point do you think coalitions will start being discussed?
If you look at the UDC, the UDC is already a coalition, right? In that sense. But if you're taking it further, the problem that you have is that, unlike, we're used to coalition politics taking place in countries that have proportional representation, because they're looking at percentages, right? But in this instance, you cannot really form a coalition until you know how many seats have been won, right? Because at this stage we're at 0, right? We don't know how many seats BDP is going to win. We don't know how many seats UDC is going to win. We don't know how many seats AP is going to win. We don't know how many seats BPF and RAP and the others and BMD are going to win, right? So the horse trading can only happen after the election. When it's clear on paper, when the result has been certified, these are the seats that A, B, and C and D have won. That's when the coalition building can take place.
Okay, you say any person can be nominated.
I want to read
in the event of a hung parliament.
I want to read the provision, right?
Yeah, I need you to come out clear and say this.
So it says, in an election of a president under this section, the Speaker shall preside at the meeting and conduct the election. Okay. Then B, it says, a person may be a candidate if and shall not be a candidate unless he has been nominated as a candidate with his consent prior to the sitting of the National Assembly at which the election takes place by not less than 10 members of the National Assembly entitled to vote in that election. That's what it says, a person. So that 14-day period that they're talking about, the National Assembly must sit within that 14-day period. I guess by that stage you know the numbers already. So that person must be nominated, and it says a person may become and may not become unless become a candidate unless they have been nominated by 10 members of the National Assembly. That's all it says.
When we come back, I want to ask you a question that I think most people are going to find extremely controversial, because it's something we really have to break down. Because if it's a person, myself included.
Yeah.
Anybody can be nominated, and I think you know where this is leading. And when you come back, I want us to actually look at the possibilities of what could happen in that instance. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
We know what you're looking for.
Your specially grilled newspaper, spiced with lifestyle, sport, entertainment, politics, business, and international news. The Voice is available every Friday. Subscribe now. The Voice.
This is, of course, the Voice of Politics. Welcome back. I'm Kealeboga Dihutso. I'm in the studio with a legal expert, Kealeboga from Kealeboga and Pillar Law Practice. We're discussing hung parliament and what it entails. It turns out that anybody can be nominated, any event of a hung parliament, anybody can be nominated as long as they have the support of 10 members of parliament. Anybody.
It says a person.
Yes.
Yeah. So a person may be a candidate if and shall not be a candidate unless they have been nominated as a candidate with their consent
Yes.
by 10 members or by not less than 10 members of the National Assembly.
In this instance, is it possible for the former president, Senator Khama, being nominated? Is there anything that stops him from coming back to Parliament, to coming back as president, using that provision?
In terms of this provision, there isn't.
Yes.
But of course, you don't read the Constitution in isolation, sections in isolation. Of course, there is the provision that says that a person can only be a president for an aggregate of 10 years,
Yes.
an aggregate term of 10 years. So I would take it that would be a disqualifying provision for him, because he has already chalked up his 10 years, right?
Yes,
So
10 years,
from
yes.
2008 to 2018.
The reason I'm bringing this up is we've often heard, in political circles, that he always talked about the possibility of doing a Putin.
Yeah.
Can that happen in this country?
It depends how you you interpret that section.
Yes.
There are people obviously who have said that, look, an aggregate of 10, if you talk about that person in respect of that individual,
Yes.
in other words, we're speaking of an individual,
Yes.
cannot serve for more than an aggregate period of 10 years,
Yes.
then it means that they can't. But if you're talking about the office, that no one shall hold the office of the presidency for more than 10 years and not speak about the individual, then that whole issue may fall away. So the people who argue of the Putin argument argue that no, in that argument, they're speaking, in that provision, they're speaking about the office of the presidency. In other words, somebody cannot hold the office of the presidency for more than 10 years.
Yes.
It's not speaking to the person. In other words, that person cannot become president for more than 10 years. So I get where the argument comes from, but I think if you're looking at the framers of the Constitution, and because you have to look at the intention as well. What were they trying to avoid? What mischief were they trying to resolve?
Yes.
And I think what we were trying to do at that stage was to say that people should not serve for more than 10 years. They must vacate, give other people a chance to come in and all of that. That one would have to, if he tried it, it obviously would end up in the courts, and that would be the argument, really.
But of course, you're giving just one interpretation in terms of approaches to law. There are those who are, conservative. What's the word that I'm looking for? I don't know why I keep conservative.
Yeah, conservative, right.
Conservative. Would actually say the law is the law is in black and white, and then there are those who will discuss the thinking behind the particular law.
Yeah.
But the tendency in Botswana has been that we define what's on paper. So in that regard, is it possible that you would come back?
I'll never say nothing is or anything is impossible.
Yes.
But you see, one of my favorite acts,
Yes.
and I feel we don't really pay a lot of attention to it in Botswana, especially the courts,
Yes.
judges, the courts, magistrates, and all of that.
Yes.
Don't pay a lot of attention to it. Is the Interpretation Act.
Yes.
And in particular, clauses 26 and 27.
Yes.
Those clauses speak to how the Constitution and other laws should be interpreted. And one of the clauses talks to the fact that they should be interpreted for the public good. They should be given as wide an interpretation as possible, and those interpretations should be done for the public good,
Yes.
right? And so when you look at provisions in the Constitution, for instance, provisions that affect your rights and things like that, the interpretation, you should not just look at the black letter and say this, that, and the other simply because in black letter it's written like that.
Yes.
You must interpret it giving for the public good and as wide as an interpretation as possible.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're looking at that one in particular, the one about the presidency,
Yes.
you have to look at the framers. What was the intention of the framers? Number one, and number two, what would a result be that is for the public good when interpreting that? And I would submit that the result would be that the framers were talking about a specific period of 10 years for one person in order to allow for fresh blood to come in, rather than having people doing Putins where they come in as vice president, then they become president again, then they become vice president, then they become president again. I don't think that serves the public interest.
Okay, and now moving towards the end of our discussion, if we do not get, I mean, we exhaust the 5 ballots in Parliament,
Yeah.
and Parliament stands dissolved, and we go for elections in 90 days. Who is the president at that time?
The president continues to be the president who is the president now. So the president only vacates their seat. Obviously, there are various permutations in the Constitution about vacation of the office of the president.
Yes.
But in this instance, where it's for the result of a presidential, an election, a general election,
Yes.
the president continues to be president until the next president is elected into office.
Now I'm confused. When we go for elections on the 29th, he's still president,
He's still
right?
president, right?
And then at what point does the Chief Justice come in, and at what point does he come back in, especially in the instance that we're talking about for 90 days?
He remains president until the new president is elected.
So even on the 24th, he will still be president?
Yes, until such a time the new president
has been-
is elected. Right. So it allows for continuation of office.
Okay.
In that sense.
Mr. Rabomono, I have a feeling that you've done a decent job of actually
I hope
explaining this to us. I think my confusion is you almost always talk about first past the post, and we always assume that anybody, whoever gets the highest number will automatically come back into Parliament.
I think that was we also discussed the issue of how in England in the UK they do it.
Yes.
Where right now we see that Boris Johnson is the head of a minority government because the Conservatives, in terms of the number of seats that they have fewer seats than the next biggest party, which is Labour, and the other opposition parties combined. Because there are people who have left the Conservative Party over the Brexit issues and all that, and there are others who were actually expelled after that prorogation issue from the Conservative Party. So Boris Johnson cannot get anything through Parliament unless he gets votes from other parties.
Okay. I'll put you on the spot. Final question.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll ever have Parliament?
I think the possibility is much higher than it has ever been in the history of this country. I think there's so many moving parts, and of course you would have known about the Afrobarometer report that came out and all of that. But there's so many moving parts. We just don't know the effect that BPF is going to have in the Central District. We don't know the effect that Masisi's renewal of BDP is going to have in the minds of the electorate, and we don't know what the UDC's program is going to do. So the possibility is higher than it's ever been.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Garabamono, Mr. Osogo Garabamono of Garabamono and Pillar Law Practice.
No problem.
And of course, tomorrow we'll be right back here again. This time around we'll be looking into the issue of unions and politics. We know Bofepuso has actually pulled out, or not, they have not pulled out. They actually said they will not be supporting anyone this time around. So the issue will be, what impact will this have on the outcome of the elections? Was there any impact in 2014? Should unions be involved in politics? If so, how should they get involved in politics? That is a debate we'll be having tomorrow, right here on The Voice on Politics. I'm Kealeboga Dihutso. I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.